Well, here we are. It's the new year. Welcome to 2026.
Happy New Year. Can you believe it? We made it. 2025 was a little rough. So we did it. So let's start over. Clean slate. Let's do it. Very excited to start
A
over for a
a
new
lot of
year. How
energy
about you?
today. A lot
I
of
got a
energy
lot of
today.
energy, a lot of optimism.
I
Got
guess
to be
so.
optimistic the first week of the year. If you're not optimistic the first week, it just goes south fairly
True.
quickly. So,
And that's what we're
yeah,
talking about today, right?
I
How do
know.
we how do we get focused and how do we set goals and how do we maintain that optimism all year long to get done what we need to get done?
Yeah, good goals. For those that are not really goal setters, a good goal can help you stay motivated and keep you on track when it gets a little bumpy, which for some people is the middle of January, and for others it takes a little longer before you're like, wait, what was I working on this year? So just keeps us all focused on where we're going, and we're going to talk about the data about that. A lot of people don't do this, and so you can really see the difference if you do and you don't. We'll talk about that, kind of tell you the why. Because the reasons it works is if you know the why. If you're just setting a goal for goal's sake or for because somebody told you you should, it's not going anywhere. That's never going to work. But when you really know your why and what you're doing, there's a really important piece of this. So before we get into all of that cool stuff about goal setting, what is going on in the farming world in January?
Well, it's looking at finances
Oh
because
boy.
it's hopefully you made the right decisions in December. So when you file your taxes, but farmers, our taxes are actually due earlier because there's the farm section and then it passes on to your personal. So it's
Oh,
always making sure it's all there and correct, and then figuring out what you have to do with planning again, Renee, and setting some
yes.
financial goals to fix whatever problem you had in taxes this year for next year. So that's
Yes. Well, business wise, we got a new CPA this year, so I'm excited to see how this tax season winds out with somebody new. We're taking
yeah.
a bigger look at the whole picture, the whole pie, and we've had it kind of segmented, and it didn't go great the first year or two of our business, and so now we're hoping for better. So you're right, we've been doing the same thing. I finally like saw my big financial picture for the family recently. And that's
Yeah.
new. It's never really been put all together. I know it's there, but I haven't really. So that's definitely different to look at it and go, oh, this is what we're responsible
And our
for.
reality is like, I've got a farm that's a separate business entity. I've got my consulting business, which is a separate entity. We have the consulting business, Rural Policy Partners, we own together, which is a separate business entity. And all of that has to roll together to our personal finances. And so it can get really complicated sometimes, just conceptualizing all of that. So it does take a
Yeah,
lot of
but
planning.
but if you have a good CPA, that is part of this goal setting is kind of planning that. And then you do set those goals. Like this should be your target for
Yeah.
cash on hand at the end of the year. And this should be your target for your expenses. And this should be your target. So even though we may not call them goals, if
Yeah.
you're really doing your finances right, especially in the consulting world, you need to have that touch point several times through the year to make sure you're on track, or you may get either a very large surprise bill or a very large payback. One year we got so much money back, I literally had to go to the federal office because the check was too big for them to give to me. And I had basically just let them borrow my money for the whole year,
Yeah.
not realizing that my tax liability wasn't near that high. And so I've had
Right.
it completely extremes. And then because it swings like that, you can get audit. And I don't like audits. I've done that a couple of times
Yeah.
too. So
No.
it's easier just to stay calm and steady, which requires some planning. So that's what we're talking about today is planning, not just on the financial side, but from just like everybody in general. So kick us off. Let's talk about goals and goal setting. Like, why do we set goals and what does it matter? We're going to have some great things in the show notes for you so you can look at this. If that's not really your style, we'll talk about why they're important and why we should set them. So you want to kick us off, Jason? Why do we look at goals?
Yeah, I mean, we just have to think about like what keeps us focused on track. And we know that if we understand what's expected of us, we all do better. And so we can apply this to our personal lives. We talk about, it's that time of the year. We talk about setting those New Year's resolutions, but it's no different in our businesses, in our workplaces. This is really the time to orient yourselves and get focused, because when we're not in alignment, when we're all not moving in the same direction, we don't have clear understanding of what we should be doing and where we're going, then things don't turn out well. And we've seen that happen a lot of times when leadership isn't clear around expectations. And so this is a great opportunity to both look at high level mission and vision. Where should we be going? But then how does that drill down into the daily grind, if you will, of what has to happen to be able to get to those places we have to be?
Yeah, in the state, for those that aren't following Iowa, the state was realigned 2 years ago for the
Yeah.
beginning of fiscal year 25, which was middle of July 1 of 25 for 24 for those that don't follow fiscal years. So a couple years in, and they were working on making a strategic plan for each agency, an operational plan for each agency, and this year for the first time, the progress report
Mhm.
that the public can read to increase transparency to know what in the world your division did. Did you meet any of your metrics? And wow, what a hard and eye-opening experience. My lucky self got to be the head of this agency for realignment. So all of that stuff was brand new. We didn't even have mission and vision statements. We had to create it all from scratch. Jason and Brent came in to help us do some of that. But now that's the first time that the rubber meets the road on what progress did you make? And are you even measuring the right stuff? And so in some
Right.
cases in our office, we were not even measuring the right stuff. There's parts that we have no control over. And so those are just frustrating to measure. And we'll talk about that in our business too, how some things are really in our control and some things are not. And so when you start really diving into goals, it's important to know which part can you actually impact and make, feel like that you're going to be responsible. And then in a team, who can you else hold responsible to get to those goals? And then if it's outside of all of your purview, should it even be a goal? So it's a big, big conversation. And so, I mean, the whole state of Iowa just went through this by the end of this last week. They were all due. You can see them all online if you're interested to know what each department is working on. But I can tell you just from my little department, we didn't even do some of it right. We collected some of the data incorrectly. We're now that we're looking at it, we're like, are these numbers even right? Because it's new. So that's why you come back and touch it again. Because even in January, you kick it off. It may not be right. You may need to look at it. So there's also some neuroscience about writing these down. And a lot of people now have moved away from the analog system and gone digital. But the brain science say that you do better when you actually write it down. Isn't that interesting, Jason?
It is interesting, and I'll jump into some data because as you were talking about this
Yep.
earlier, I was doing some quick searching in the background, and only 3% of people actually do this, right? And the probability of being successful in achieving your goal is 42% more likely when you
Wow.
actually write it down. But so few people do that. And so you're
Wow.
really right about that, right? That's a key part of accountability is when you actually write it down, put it on the wall next to your desk, you have to look at it and you have to know, you know what, I'm responsible for this and it means more to you. You're more invested in the process.
One of the things you said earlier about setting New Year's resolutions, if you just make that little intention out in the land, the majority of people quit. It's the second Friday of January. It's
Um,
called Quitter's Day. It's got its own name. So if you're out there and this is, the first week of the month of January, and if you made a resolution and didn't write it down, didn't really go into goal setting, by next Friday, the likelihood is very high you're already done. And so we go through that. I don't even know why we do that. We go through this process of thinking we're going to make big change on January 1st. Don't write it down. Don't get the details. Don't make anybody accountable. Don't have anybody to hold us accountable or to give us feedback. And then we're done mid-January. So at least we're quick at it. I mean, we're just like, oh, we didn't mean it. We're going to the gym. Oh, no, we're not. But
yeah,
for me, a gym person, it drives me crazy this time of year because
yeah.
starting around Thanksgiving, all the sales started. So all the extra people show, but just for a little bit. By the time I get back to kind of beginning of March, it'll be just back to me in my regular locker. But right now, it's a little bit squishy in there. So what about
And
some more data? Talk
well, I
about
was
it.
going to say, that really kind of goes back to setting actionable and attainable goals, right? We have
Yeah.
to be realistic about what we can do. In the winter, I struggle. It's been rough this winter, and so getting out and running has been really hard for
Oh,
me.
no.
So,
Yeah.
I've got my road bike and trainer set up behind me, and I can tell you a couple times I've jumped onto bike this year. I picked the hilly route. And
Eh.
about 40 minutes in, I'm like, I'm done because I didn't pace myself. I didn't work up to it, right? I just jumped right in and I could do a
Ooh,
10% grade up
ooh,
that mountain in whatever world I was
of
in.
course.
Um, and I set myself up for failure. And when we set goals, as we kind of think about some of this data, are we
Mm,
setting ourselves up for success in the first place? Because it's
mm.
really hard to set good goals, Renee. And I think you kind of talked about sometimes you miss the mark, you don't do it right. It's better to set a goal and then realize, you know what, I had the wrong goal, and then pivot and hold yourself accountable to that than not do anything at all or ignore it.
Yep. Well, and sometimes it may be a little bit different. You might have the right goal in mind. So if your goal was to lose 25 pounds or something, but your plan was to ride all the hilly routes every single day for 12 days in a row or whatever to get there,
Right.
maybe the strategy wasn't right. So
Right.
maybe the goal in those cases could have been the goals okay. So when you go back and look, it may not be the goal that gets thrown out. It may be just like the pathway there. So we'll talk about that in our when we get here in a minute. We talk
Yeah.
about podcast goals. We had some goals and they weren't bad goals. We didn't have the right structure in place to get to the goal last year,
Yep.
but we kept the goal because the goal was a good goal and it had good return on investment for that goal, but we didn't have the right strategy. So sometimes it isn't, but you have to know the difference because sometimes goals are just bad. I am a person, and my therapist will laugh at me, but I will make goals just cause. And I'm just that kind of person. So over the summer, I'd made this goal to swim a mile. No good reason. No, none, no
Yeah.
reasons. And my body didn't like it. It didn't do it. It didn't do it well. Now I could do three-quarters of a mile very easily. Eventually, it wasn't at the beginning, but I could get there. And then my brain sort of clicked. It's like, well, why isn't this good enough? I mean,
Right.
there was no reason to have this other goal. And so sometimes that was just not the great goal. The swimming was the purpose.
Right.
The whole purpose was
Right.
action. It wasn't the distance. And so sometimes in that case, I was like, well, this is silly. I just scrap this and go back to this was what was good. And this is where it's going to be a good spot. So, goals can be complex, but you can't even do any of that if you didn't even write it down and try. So let's talk about the business this year, Jason. So we had some goals last year that we set. We made a lot of them. So talk about the wins. We did a lot of great stuff in World Policy Partners. In the last episode, we talked about 15, 16, I can't remember how many states we were in, all these stages, getting all these new contracts, working in all these states. So a lot of great stuff happened in World Policy Partners. So you're taking a great year and turning it
Yeah.
and hoping to continue the trajectory forward. So where are you starting this year?
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of starting with where we left off, right? Like we set some what we thought were pretty high goals last year. We said we want to be on a doing, and we only track things that meet a certain level, right? We
Yeah.
speak at a lot of different places, but we're only tracking those places where we go speak where we're doing a breakout or a keynote at a statewide or national conference,
Yeah.
um,
True.
somewhere in the country. I mean, so we kind of set a bar kind of high, and we said we were going to do one of those a month on average. And we exceeded that, Renee.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite an achievement, not just logistically the travel that we did throughout the year, but being able to be selected in all the parts and pieces that go into that, right? You got to write abstracts, you got to make connections, you got to follow up, you got to coordinate, and when we think about goals, is it seems like, well, that was an easy goal. We spoke one time once a month we went somewhere and spoke. Well, it's a lot more that went into that. There's a lot of
Yes.
time and energy and
Yeah.
effort and work. And so sometimes we don't capture that. And so we're doing a
No.
better job, I think, as we set these goals to talk about how do we actually do this? What do we need support in and how can we do it better as we move to the next year? And I think that's the part of goals evolving. Like we write them down every year, we track them
Mhm.
every year, and then we circle back and talk about them and then decide how are we going to do that? Are we not going to do that next year? Right.
Right.
We have that open discussion. Like, do we want to speak again next year? Do
Right.
we want to put time and effort into this?
And the other really exciting thing, and maybe many people don't know, but it wasn't just out of our pocket. We're doing this. We have contracts to go speak,
Yeah.
and so it's part of our business model to speak
Right.
on behalf of companies. So it's an income generator, which I know before last year we wouldn't have even got granted that was even a thing. And so not only has it become we wanted to do it, but now we're paid to do it. So there was only one or two, and we have a budget for maybe this many conferences that we're just going to do because it's the right thing to do and we need to be there. And we have conferences like that where you and I will reach out and maybe not get paid for it, but it's the
Yeah.
right thing to do to help people and we pay it. But a
Mhm.
lot of this though was actually work and business. So it's a really exciting new income generator in line for us. And so then you have to decide this year because it's pretty time consuming, like you just said,
Right.
how much of it do you want to do?
Yeah, and we've had to quantify the relationships we built being out on the road because we now get phone calls of people asking us to come do things for them,
That's
or
right.
to partner with them on projects. And so there's also a hidden return on investment that it's really hard to quantify because we ran into somebody in one state and they happen to manage a government contract across the region and they need some help. And so how do you quantify that when we're looking ahead? And so it's complicated, right? It's not always simple just to set a goal.
No,
Um,
but it is important to think about that because, like, my very first contract consulting on my own over a decade ago now was because I went to a conference. I
yep,
was invited to a legislative conference talking about the work we had done in our state when I was
yep,
a legislator. And then another state walked up to me, and that was the very first opportunity to go to a second state. And then
yeah,
once you're in a second state, then you can get invited to other states. But it has, so Illinois is a prime example. You
yeah,
guys have this brand new contract, you're doubling down, working in Illinois, helping their
yeah,
critical access hospitals in some rural parts of the state. And that started with us going to their rural health conference,
mm,
but it was 2 years ago, maybe three, for the
yep,
first introduction
yep,
that started it.
right,
So you're right, it builds business, and our line of work is 100% by referral and renewal.
yep,
So sometimes you can't always see that investment right up, but it's important if you track it that you're like, okay, we've been in that state, we talked to this person, they saw us speak, they know what we do from this long ago.
yep,
And so that is how it happens. Or a state will then go to another national conference, mention you, and you get passed
right,
on. And so, but you have to have that professional look and still doing the work to be able to
yeah.
do it. And so it's a really important piece. So besides that though, you also have some work you want to do in this podcast space, which has even
We
been
do.
harder to track up until now.
It has been hard to track, right? This whole podcast thing was kind of a let's have a podcast. Well, how big do we want it to be? Where do we want it to go? How do we want it to evolve? And so we've really moved from the okay, we can podcast, but what do we ultimately want to occur from the podcast? How do we move this to the next level? And so we're really looking at how do we engage more guests?
Hmm.
How do we create a more diverse podcast maybe? How do we look at things differently moving forward? How can we drive more downloads to get to the next level? Or how do we partner with others to create podcasts for them? Maybe our skill set could be adapted a bit. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there, and podcasts is directly related partly to the more we're out and about, the more we expose people to the podcast. Also, the more we podcast and it goes out, it impacts our LinkedIn followers and some of the other metrics of how do we engage with people, newsletters that go out. All of those things interrelate. And so sometimes it's hard to set goals and kind of get granular around those things because we kind of know where we want to go. We want to continue to improve and have a bigger reach, but what's the right measurement and metric to get us there? And that's hard.
Yeah. For those listening, for myself, I had to create a podcast on my goals that didn't happen for multiple years. And this is before Jason and I were working together full, and it kind of was prior to COVID. And I was always like, it's always been like a goal on my list, never on Jason's. He's been very
Yep.
clear about that, but it was on mine. And so I had it in my back mind. And I've been working with our integrator Molly now for a long time. And there were multiple years where we're like, it's just not the right time, just not the right time. So really though, the beginning of the podcast was create it. Let's like figure it out, like get the team in place to make it happen, to get it published. And so year one goal was like, just see if we can even do it. Year two was, can we do it consistently? Because for a
Right.
podcast to be worth anything, it needs to be consistent. And that requires both of us putting time on the calendar to
Mm,
get it done, right? So now this year, we finally got it enough under our belts and we're good enough at it that we can really truly try to
right.
launch it because now we're like, okay, we've got the timing down, we've got the how to, we've got the digital shorts being created, all the pieces now are there as a professional podcast. Now for other people who have like these big podcast groups, they can come out of the chute like that. But when you're
Right.
small like us, we can't. So sometimes there's like, oh well, we've already this many episodes in and it hasn't done really what we want. But it took all that time to get it to a level now that it's a really professional podcast and the guests want to come. We get people
Yep.
asking us to be on the podcast. People want to be here. We want to talk to their audiences too. So I think it is pretty exciting because now all that pre stuff. And so I get feedback like, well, at the beginning, it wasn't that good. I'm like, nothing is when you first start. I don't know that I'd recommend listening to the first
Renee, you're
one.
not going to believe this. I had coffee with another entrepreneur consultant yesterday. And he asked me, he goes, I've always wanted, one of his goals was, I've always wanted to do a podcast. How do you do that? How did you get
Oh
it started?
no.
Like, I'm
Oh no.
suddenly the expert on how
Oh
to
no.
start a podcast. He goes, how do you stay so disciplined? How can you guys do that every week? How do you do that? I'm like, well, we created a structure So it's easy for us to do that.
Yeah.
So it kind of reminded me of like, this is harder than we give ourselves credit for sometimes, but it
Well, and this is
started
one for the audience, since we're being transparent today. This is one that we do on our time that's not monetized
right.
today. It's a profession building. It is an ability to improve our speaking. The more we do this, the more we ingrain in our own heads how the system works. We remember the stories from the different places, which helps us in our regular jobs. So it's a lot of value to us, but we don't get paid to do it today. And so when you're looking at it on the books, you're like, is it worth doing this? Because we don't get paid to do it and whatever. But you're right. The amount of feedback and the amount of good things that have come because it exists is interesting. But I know the first time you were asked if you would create like a small series for somebody else and get paid to
Yeah.
do it, you were like, what? And I'm like, well, because now you have a
Yeah.
podcast. And so, but it isn't a just do it for 3 months and see what happens. You have to like invest. And so at this point, I'm excited to see where this goes. And we've had some amazing guests. We talked about that on the last podcast. We had some awesome guests this last year, but there's so many more we could bring in. And wouldn't it be fun to just all the people you meet on the road, get them connected so other people can meet them and hear their cool stories? Because you meet so many great, even if you just did the hero programs, even those just across the country would be so exciting for people to hear that, hey, this cool stuff is happening. And it doesn't have to be coming through us. We can have the person there to say, hey, this is the cool stuff we're doing. So I'm excited about that.
Our last goal, is something that's been hanging around on our goal list for a while, and I think we need to push it forward. And that's doing a better job of kind of highlighting some of the best projects that we've done. And so we've talked about doing white papers or better articulating
Oh,
the work that we've done in the past. And so that's something we really want to put together this year. And so we're thinking about how could that be a component of our monthly newsletter? How can we better highlight those things on the website? And really taking some thoughtful time to design and put those together so we can highlight the successes that we've had over the years. And we could easily do that, once a month for the next year. And so I think I'm
wow.
kind of excited of thinking about some of those ways we can better articulate and talk about the wins that we've had that other people can learn from.
Fun fact, I just had a really great brainstorm idea for you that I'll bring to you because I just met somebody at one of the conferences we were at who have the white papers that they brought to me to look at
Yeah.
about projects that they've done because they want to continue those in the country. So
Yeah.
I've already got a fairly great
See?
example to just hand you of how somebody else did it. Hadn't even thought about that, but you're right. We've talked about that in the past about we haven't been great about collecting feedback from clients. We haven't
Right.
been as good about even on the podcast getting people to comment.
Yeah.
We just are busy, and so we don't think about that. So it's for us, it's part of learning to delegate better and asking our support team to help us in these areas. And they would love to because they would love to brag about us, but we're not good at bragging on ourselves because we're busy. We're busy doing the
Right.
next thing, and
Right.
we've prioritized getting the podcast done, but not necessarily getting all of the follow-up parts the way we should. So it's really exciting that that's on the to-do list. Man, that's a really great idea. I love that one a lot. As you could tell, I wasn't at the meeting, everybody. I was busy. I was writing a report. Let me just tell you. Remember that progress report I mentioned a while ago that the state had to come up with? Well, Renee learned about it very late and had to put it together at the last minute. So that's what I was doing while Jason's got the reins of Royal Policy Partners. It's in great hands. It's going to be awesome. Well, before we go, everybody, the recovering politician self-care policy of the week. I'm going to double down on this because 'tis the season to share your germs. When you are sick, please stay home. I don't even know how else to tell you because we had a couple people in the office a few weeks back. So and so's kid had influenza A, so and so's husband had influenza A. They feel fine. Oh, for heaven's sakes, you're a carrier. Don't bring that crap in the office. And so, nobody wants that before the holidays, and nobody needs it, during the holidays or after or any other time of the year. I don't know who's vaccinated or not. It's not my business. But we also don't need to share. But secondarily, if you can't force people to stay home, which you can't, get some really quality air purifiers. I am so less sick this year because we've gone with these massive big HEPA filter air purifiers in my office. Amazingly different. And so, everybody, thanks for joining us today. Before we go, don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. If you leave us a positive review, you'll get a prize. Thanks, everybody. Great to see you. Happy 2026.
Mm.
Bye.